Does the government work for us or do we work for the government? If the Federal Reserve has an infinite amount of money it can print, then why do we even need to work in the first place? Tonight, going to work versus printing cash. When the government of the United States was engaged in World War I in 1917, the Congress wanted to give President Wilson, the original nanny stater who hated blacks, Catholics, and Jews, the spending flexibility to pay for U.S. involvement in the war. But Congress didn't want to lose total control of the purse strings, so it set up a cap for the total amount that it would let the president borrow. Remember, under the Constitution, only Congress can raise money and decide how to spend it. But President Wilson persuaded his all-white, all-male, all-pro-war Congress to let him raise money via borrowing, so long as he spent it on the war. Thus was born the debt ceiling. After President Wilson was incapacitated by a stroke and the war ended, Congress enacted some fiscal restraint that began to pay off the federal debt to ensure that future generations wouldn't be burdened with the crushing taxation needed to pay the interest on the debt. But that ended quickly with the disastrous presidency of Herbert Hoover, whose borrowing and tariffs paved the way for our first socialist president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. FDR took control of the finances of not just the federal government, but of private industry as well, from General Motors to mom-and-pop stores, everywhere in the United States, as he ushered in the New Deal. The New Deal was a 15-year-long nightmare experiment in government control of private industry and government seizing private property for below-market rates that actually prolonged the Great Depression. When FDR's attacks on the fundamentals of the economy, his confiscation of gold, and his setting of prices at random, all in a maniacal attempt to gain control over every aspect of American life, became apparent even to him that it was making things worse, he decided we needed another war. When the debt of the federal government ballooned exponentially in World War II, Americans thought nothing of it. Wartime hysteria galvanized the American conscience, and an overbearing government whose propaganda outmatched Europe's in force and subtlety convinced Americans that they should accept rationing, even though it was unnecessary, a draft, even though volunteers were coming in faster than the government could accept them, and buy war bonds, even though the Federal Reserve could easily have inflated the American dollar to pay for World War II the same way it pays for our current 5 wars. So if the Federal Reserve can pay for war, why can't it pay for us? Stated differently, why do we even have to work? If infinite money can be created at the Federal Reserve, what's the point of going out and working? Can't the federal debt simply be paid off by Uncle Ben wiring a check directly to the Chinese? These are the kinds of questions I enjoyed putting to my students when I taught law school. And the questions, of course, are designed to make us think about what the government is really doing. Of course we can't print our way to prosperity. We all understand that in order to invest or pay off debt, you first have to work and earn. In a capitalist society based on sound money and free markets, work comes first, and then you save. And then after you've accumulated enough savings, you can invest. Taking on debt would occur only if an individual or a corporation wanted to take the risk that he or it would earn more and spend less in the future. One can only morally risk his own money or that voluntarily given to him by others for risk, not the people's money. But Keynesian, that is, big government economics, turns all that on its head. The British fascist, Professor John Maynard Keynes, taught Wilson, FDR, and their descendants that more debt meant more wealth, that freedom was slavery, and that war was peace. Every president since FDR has bought into much of this nonsense. Fast forward to today. The current national debt would be unbelievable, even to men like Professor Keynes, who probably thought that when the government debt went into the trillions, no one would believe any government would be capable of paying it back, and all debt would be forgiven out of some patriotic duty. Indeed, the Chinese today have issued warnings about America's current struggles over the debt ceiling, as they fear that we might not be able to come up with enough cash to pay them back all they've loaned to us. They might be right, considering that the total amount of money that we owe doesn't even exist on the planet. So where does all this end? Who has the courage to come out and tell the American people that the emperor wears no clothes? Does any of the presidential candidates currently running have a record for voting no every time on the debt ceiling, or governing their states in such a way as to provide us the confidence that they will bring monster government under control? When looking at the early assembly of presidential candidates, please ask yourself, who among them will reject debt as a means of governing? Who will embrace hard work and sound money? Who really believes in freedom? You know who these people are. The answers will not surprise you. From New York,